Hello, and welcome to the final environmental speaker series for winter quarter, wrapping up our Salish Sea theme. My name is Stefan Freeland. I'm the coordinator. As usual, those of you in the classroom, I'm going to ask to turn off the cell phones, put away your laptops, tablets, so we can have your attention up here for our guest speaker. And those of you on Zoom, welcome. And we'll have time for questions at the end, which the Zoom crew can put through chat, and the room crew can raise your hand when we get there. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Aquila Flower, who's just right down the hall in the JS Arena, which is where I spend a lot of my time, talking about, of course, the most obvious of projects, the creating of the Atlas for the Salish Sea. So Aquila Flower, welcome.
Thank you. Well, yeah, so wrapping up your quarter of thinking about the Salish Sea by talking about everything about the Salish Sea in 35 minutes. So it's nice to be here. I've been at Western for 8 years now, I think, and somehow I have avoided being at the speaker series accidentally. I mean, talking at it. So this is my first time here. So I want to talk about can you click the...
Okay. So we want to go share screen?
Click, we'll just do this one.
That one. But
Right.
we also want to do...
Oh no. Do we know what we're doing? Okay.
Yeah, let's see if I do that first. No, we don't want to do that because I got
Yeah,
to
we do.
share. No, I got
What?
to share screen first.
Oh.
Otherwise, they'll never know what you're doing.
Oh, we're keeping it totally mysterious for Zoom world. Okay.
Yeah.
And everyone. Okay.
Pretty good.
Now we're really doing it. Okay. So about my work recently, creating the start of an atlas for the Salish Sea bioregion. So I start with this figure here that shows the context of the Salish Sea watersheds within the broader context of the watersheds of Western North America. You can see the big ones there, the McKenzie, the Fraser, the Columbia that you might be familiar with. The Salish Sea watersheds are shown highlighted in green, and they're small compared to some of those big watersheds, but still big enough to be home to over 9 million people and an amazing diversity of organisms living in the waters and on land. So introductions, I'm a professor of geography and environmental studies here. I teach a lot of the GIS classes. So if you want to learn how to make maps, you'll probably end up in a class with me at some point. I was cartographer for the State of the Salish Sea report, and I'm going to show a bunch of maps from that in my presentation today. And then I'm also the author of the Salish Sea Atlas, which is an ongoing project. So goals today. I want to briefly talk a little bit about the history of mapping of the Salish Sea and the idea of the Salish Sea as a region, make my case for the need for transboundary mapping, making these international bioregional maps, and complain a bit about the challenges of this work doing transboundary mapping, and then introduce the Salish Sea Atlas and actually go in and show you some of the web maps that I've made for that. Okay, so I know you've been doing the speaker series, you probably heard some definitions of the Salish Sea so far, but just in case you stopped in randomly here, the Salish Sea is this transboundary estuarine ecosystem that crosses the international border in between Washington and British Columbia. The sea itself is these inland protected marine waterways. And we call it estuarine because there's a lot of fresh water that comes into it, primarily from the Fraser River. So that's the Salish Sea itself. The Salish Sea bioregion, as I'm defining it and attempting to map it, includes those marine waters, but also the watersheds that drain into the Salish Sea itself. This region makes sense as a region because there's a very long history of interconnected cultures and ecosystems. In many processes you would think about, such as the movement of orcas in the ocean or the dispersal of trees, seedlings, or the movement of storms are not aware of the international border, right? They are occurring across the border throughout this region. So it makes a lot of sense to think about it as a cohesive region. I'm referring to it as a bioregion. A bioregion is an idea of drawing territories or boundaries not based on political boundaries, which we know are often fairly arbitrary. Many of them were drawn by men who lived far away and were not familiar with the region. They may not reflect the natural, biological, or cultural landscape. Bioregion instead says, let's look at natural features to define our regions. So watersheds, ecosystem types, climatic types that we could use to delineate regions rather than political borders. This is particularly relevant, this bioregional idea, For transboundary or international ecosystems such as this one, where we really have to be able to look across the border and see the big picture to understand what's going on within this region. Any sort of management, conservation, restoration, scientific research, or just general education about an international region like this requires, I think, this bioregional perspective, whether you call it that or not. So this bioregion is centered on these three main water bodies here: the Strait of Georgia, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and Puget Sound. I'll show you a little bit more detail about that. The map on the left here shows the sub-basins within the Salish Sea. So we can think about those three main water bodies, but we can break them down into smaller sub-basins that we think about based on bathymetry. We have 10 sub-basins that would make up the Salish Sea itself. In the south, it extends down to the edges of Puget Sound. In the west, it extends out to this specific line that has been defined, that is the edge of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And in the north, the Salish Sea goes up to Discovery Passage and associated inlets that are just at the northern edge of the Strait of Georgia. Then when we expand that into the whole bioregion and think about the watersheds, we can see on the map here, a kind of busy map with 33 watersheds that fall within the Salish Sea bioregion. The Fraser River is by far the biggest freshwater input to the Salish Sea, provides about 2/3 of the fresh water that comes into the sea, and its watersheds cover about 1/4 of the bioregion's area. But there are many different watersheds, each of which plays an important role in ecological processes within the bioregion. Okay, so that's the place I'm talking about. Now, a little history of people talking about this place. First of all, I want to clarify that the Salish Sea is named in honor and recognition of the Coast Salish peoples who have been and are stewards of these lands and waters for millennia. This map up here shows the 14 different distinct Coast Salish languages spoken in this region at the time of European contact. Amazing linguistic diversity. So the region is named in honor of the Coast Salish peoples, but it doesn't necessarily act as a translation of an indigenous geographical concept. I've not found any records of the Salish Sea itself being named something as a distinct entity in indigenous geography traditions. Many times when we're doing cartography, we find that assumptions of Western ideas of territories, of what counts as a geographic region, of cartography in general, don't directly translate to indigenous geographic ideas. So we could say there have been many names for the Salish Sea and many relationships with the Salish Sea and parts of it, with humans living here for millennia. When we start seeing maps of this region, this is the oldest one I found, 1792, from a Spanish exploration here. There's no name for the Salish Sea as we think of it now. There might be names for different water bodies within the region. There's no name for this sea. But notice this map focuses on just about what I showed as the Salish Sea, pointing out that this is sort of a logical, natural region to make a map of. It makes sense as a consistent region when you're looking at the geography of the area. This map is 1792. Here's a couple more. From 1858 on the left and 1900 on the right. These are both US maps, but notice that the maps continue north past the border into the Strait of Georgia, again showing the continuity of this landscape. It just makes sense to think about it as a region. Though notice there is no name for it as a region here. It's still the individual straits or gulfs. Gulf of Georgia, you might notice, had a different name in the past. So it's not until the late 20th century that we start seeing maps of this region with a name. Here's Mikulski's 1987-ish river map. Brian E. Penn's wonderful A Year on the Wild Side book, which I really recommend, is very fun to read, from 1999 says Salish Sea. There it is, the phrase. Georgia Basin Puget Sound Ecosystem Indicators Report, a scientific report trying to set an ecological baseline for the region, delineates this area, but calls it this Georgia Basin Puget Sound name a little less catchy than Salish Sea. And then, of course, Stefan's map here from 2009, labeling it the Salish Sea, showing something about like the region that I'm talking about. And this map, years before I met Stefan, I remember meeting this map for the first time. I was a graduate student at the University of Victoria. I'm American, but I was living in Canada. I was very aware of the arbitrariness of the international border, trying to deal with visas, going back and forth across the border regularly. Somebody put this up in a hallway at the university where I was. And I remember the moment I walked down the hallway and saw this for the first time and literally was stopped in my tracks because it's a beautiful map, but also because it gave a name to this home that I already knew I had, but I didn't have a name for. And that's a little personal story, a little anecdote, but it represents that power of maps for creating places, for creating legitimacy for toponyms, for place names, for regions, which can be used for good or for bad, right? But in this case, is this compelling, persuasive cartography saying this place exists. It's hard to say that we should care about or protect or work to understand a place if we don't have a name for that place. And I could give you a table of coordinates and describe to you where the Salish Sea is, but that wouldn't really connect with your heart the way a map does. When we see a map like this, it makes sense to us. We understand what we're talking about with that region, and maybe we believe that it's real in a way we never would with just text. Credits. So around 2009, Stefan made that map, and 2009, 2010, legal definitions of the Salish Sea as a geographic entity were adopted in Canada and the US. So we came up with a legal definition, and this term, Salish Sea, started being used more widely. And I think it spread in part because of persuasive cartography and the work of Bert Weber and others to spread this name, but also because we were understanding more and more the interconnectedness of environmental challenges and processes. We started to understand more about what's going on in this ecosystem. The figure on the left there shows the flow of marine water into the Salish Sea and the sort of brackish mix of marine and fresh water that flows back out of the Salish Sea on the right in green there. And I show this to remind you of how in motion the Salish Sea is. The water that comes in and out of the Salish Sea moves throughout this region, connecting all the inlets, making sure that anything that happens in the Salish Sea happens everywhere in the Salish Sea. Those arrows do not stop at an international border, right? And of course, we have this massive freshwater input into the sea. It's not just marine water. The map on the right there shows our major rivers for the bioregion. These rivers create this intimate connection in between land and marine waters, meaning that things that we do on land, things that happen on land, also affect the marine waters, whether that's delivering nutrients or pollutants, whether that's changes in the temperature of the water that goes into the sea. The land and the water are connected, and the marine water circulates in a way that everything is connected within this region. And so we have to consider the whole to understand what's happening. Yes?
Slightly bit slower from the Zoom audience would be your question.
Okay.
Thank you. There's so much to talk about.
There's 17 slides. So that sets up my case for the need for transboundary mapping, I think. We have these, this interconnected transboundary socioecological system here. A little bit of a mouthful. Everything is connected. That's the simple way to think about it. And I think we cannot manage, conserve, protect, understand, or really properly appreciate these transboundary systems in isolation. So we need bioregional maps. We need bioregional spatial data sets. And when we have this long history of mapping the Salish Sea bioregion. We saw about 200 years passed in between that first map I showed you and the late 20th century maps, starting to actually call it the Salish Sea. But it's a pretty new term. It's only a little over a decade since it was legally adopted. A lot of people are not familiar with it yet. So there's this kind of need for education and buy-in, get people on board with the beauty of this regional identity. So we need these maps, we need these data sets, but I'm going to tell you, it's not as easy as just making a map. Oh, let me tell you, that's the land cover data set for the Salish Sea bioregion. They're showing how much of the area is forested in green, with some urban areas in gray and yellow areas representing agricultural land use. And a map like that takes a lot of work to make, but we need those. Okay, so let me show you a map of my nightmares that I made here. A map would ideally provide geographic context for a location. It would give you information about the situation and the setting of that place, not just its site and space. But often we see maps like this that leave out really important context. So you've got the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and then often on these maps, you'll see, well, I guess the Southwestern Ocean down there where you might think Mexico would be, and maybe the big Sea of Canada to the north. We often make these maps of the continental US and leave out the geographic context of our neighbors. That can lead to actual misunderstandings if people are not aware of what is around a location. But even if it doesn't really confuse you about what's up there, you don't really think it's an ocean, maps like this reinforce what's important, what's significant, what is relevant to whatever you're studying. If we're often leaving out things on the other side of an international border, it implies that those things are not worth us paying attention to. And when this message is sent by map after map, it becomes ingrained in our psyches. Whatcom County is particularly guilty of this. There's some maps from a Google image search. When I started teaching here, I wanted to do some mapping exercises with my students, and I would go and look for a map or a data set. And again, I would find these floating Whatcom Islands with no data around them. This is a price you pay for living in a border town, a border county. Of course, the things around Whatcom County matter too. I don't usually insult maps in public, but that map on the left, there is no excuse for it. It actually has Canada in blue. It's from citydata.com or something, I don't know. Okay, so Isle of Whatcom, lacking context. Those were bad maps that I chose from Google image searches. But here are good maps from the State of the Salish Sea report. These reflect real good science that has been done, but each one of them shows only half of the story. That's not because of an oversight on the part of the scientists who created these maps. It's because there are real challenges involved in making these maps that go across the border and cover our whole region. So what are those challenges? Here's time for my complaint list. First of all, you have to realize you're working with a lot of different jurisdictions. This map on the right shows just our counties and regional districts, which are about the county equivalent in Canada, along with big city areas, giving you a sense of the number of jurisdictions you're dealing with. So sometimes working across so many jurisdictions, the data sets we want just don't exist at all. Nobody's mapped it. I'm working with a wonderful graduate student who's trying to map kelp, and we just don't have a lot of survey records of kelp in some areas of the Salish Sea. Nothing we can really do about that yet, eventually. But more often, with a lot of the data I look for, the data do exist, but they're housed by lots of different agencies across two countries. Maybe they're county governments, maybe it's different levels of government. And so to get those data sets, you have to go to all the different websites and maybe write to them and call them and be familiar with all the different jurisdictions that might house and release data. That slows down research a lot. That just takes up a lot of time, and you might just give up and go back to your project focused on just Puget Sound or just the Strait of Georgia, because it slows things down so much. Then if you do find the data sets, you may find that they don't line up. And I want to talk about 3 different ways they don't line up. But first, spatially, if they just don't line up in space. And that might be because they were drawn for different extents, so they don't cover your whole area. Or the data were recorded in different coordinate systems, and that can create some offsets. You might find that your data were created at different scales or levels of generalization. And that matters a lot with coastal regions, where the scale that you draw a coastline at makes the coast look really different. If you generalize the coastline a lot, it'll look really different than a detailed map of the coast. And when you try to put 2 different data sets together, and the coastlines were created at different levels of generalization, they won't match up at all. They're not really comparable data sets. Let's see. Oh, here, You might think the international border is really well known and established, but it looks different in different data sets. This is census data from British Columbia in green and Washington, that kind of tan color. And we just download the census records from these two countries. There are these gaps and these overlaps. So there's no clear, correct international border in these data sets. This is all stuff you can correct, but it's slow, it takes a long time, and it takes some knowledge of these systems to do that. And then there's definitions of boundaries. We do know where the international border is. That's not really the issue, but do we know where the Salish Sea is? So I'm showing here a few different maps of the Salish Sea region, and they show different boundaries, right? Especially look at the northern boundary. You'll see it's a little different on these different maps. Doesn't really matter which one is right or wrong particularly, but there's this inconsistency here that makes it challenging to compare anything. If you want to see how things are changing over time and you don't even know which region you're measuring it for, it's pretty hard to do that. For the Salish Sea Atlas, I tried to base this on the legal definitions that came out in 2009 and 2010 as much as I could. That's that pink line drawn there that shows the Salish Sea itself according to the legal definition used in Canada and the US. So we need to agree on our definitions of regions. And Stefan and I are still friends, even though our map has slightly different northern boundaries. It hasn't caused any fights. Yes, I know you made them with that map, but now I'm trying to like update it. So, okay, another challenge is that our data sets often don't line up, not just spatially, but temporally or conceptually. So temporally might just be that the data were collected in different years, and that might make them not comparable. I worked a lot with census records, and the US and Canada do their demographic censuses in different years. So they're just never quite recording the same thing. There could be different offsets though. I talked about trying to map kelp, and we found records from the 1970s and records from 2020. If you put those together on a map, it looks like a map of where kelp is, but it's for really different time periods. Those are not really showing the same thing. Sometimes there are workarounds, sometimes there are not for those temporal mismatches. And then conceptually. So units of measurement is an easy conceptual difference to fix. If you have millimeters and inches, you can convert between them. You just have to do that in your table. But there's harder challenges that show up. The type of data you collected. If you have GPS points where someone has gone out and recorded where things are, that's one type of data. If you have satellite imagery where someone has gone in and tried to translate that into a record of the same thing someone was making GPS points of, they're not necessarily totally comparable data sets in the end. They're kind of different definitions of data. And then bigger stuff, the categories that we use to describe reality, to generalize reality, often don't match up. How do you describe and name forest types? We can all agree probably on the tree species, but how do you name the ecosystems? I found when I try to map forest types, I download the Canadian data, I download the US data, and there at the international border, there was a sudden sharp change from Douglas fir to Western hemlock forests. That's not because the trees actually changed there at the border. It's just how we name those ecosystem types. So you can get around those by renaming them, but that's another step. We have to go through and understand the labels that are used for these different categories. Categories of race and ethnicity, right? These are culturally created subjective labels that we apply. They have real effects on people's everyday lives, but the way we label them and divide them is culturally specific. And Canada and the US use different definitions in their census records, different numbers of categories, different questions they ask. So you have to combine those somehow if you want to make a cohesive map. And then something as simple as what counts as a protected area. I was surprised mapping protected areas. Really different data are released by Canada and the US. Canada is pretty conservative about what it counts in its national protected area databases. It doesn't include city parks, for instance, whereas the US includes city parks and like DNR land that's used for logging and things like that. So there are different definitions of what protected means, and you have to go through and harmonize those somehow to make them comparable. So all that list of complaints and needs brings me to this opportunity. to improve transboundary mapping for the Salish Sea bioregion. And I'm trying to do that with my contribution of the Salish Sea Atlas, which is a totally open access, free, digital, online, interactive atlas. It includes maps and short text summaries, looking at lots of different environmental and cultural variables for the whole bioregion. So I'm only looking at data sets that I was able to harmonize for the whole bioregion. And I'm designing it to think about a broad audience, not people who are necessarily doing GIS analysis, but educators and policymakers and the whole community who might want to explore the details of this bioregion. Then I also make the data sets available. So for someone who is familiar with spatial analysis techniques in GIS, they can download these open access but harmonized data sets and not have to go through all those steps of correcting the mismatches. So I think this will speed up a lot of research and mapping that other people do. This is all delivered online with these interactive web maps. They were really highly customized with the base maps and the reference layers and the thematic data sets that I show on them. And it's all housed on Esri's ArcGIS online platform. So it's housed out there in the cloud and available from anywhere. So let's take a look at it, if I can successfully escape here.
I think you're gonna have to go back to not extending your, in order to get to the.
Okay. Intermission here while I change the screen. Screen, well, okay, let's share screen again.
I should be, you're still.
It said it. Okay, it worked. All right, so here is the Salish Sea Atlas website. I give the address in my slides there, but if you just Google Salish Sea Atlas, it's the only one that pops up. This website has reference maps, so you can download these updated reference maps that I made, and there's higher resolution versions linked to, and all the details. There's a download the data section where you can download the data sets if you want to do analysis with them. You can also access them and just sort of make your own simple web maps. But what I really want to look at here are the Atlas chapters themselves. So right now there's 6. This is an ongoing project. I will probably be working on this for the rest of my life, truly. There's so, I'm going to keep updating it forever. But right now there's 6 chapters. So I want to just show you a few highlights. I'm not going to talk through the whole atlas. That zoom thing at the top always gets in my way. Okay. So the first chapter is this introductory chapter. Where is the Salish Sea? Just introducing the location, the toponyms or place names of the Salish Sea. This is a nice introductory thing if you want to tell your grandmother that you live in the Salish Sea now at Western Washington University and you want to describe what it is. I wanted to show you just this section, the marine waters and islands section of this. If you want to think more about the place names included within this bioregion, you can zoom in on all these maps. I'm clicking that little plus button down there. And it was loading pretty fast before, but now I'm doing a presentation, so it's going to slow down. But you can zoom in and more labels will pop up for the islands and the water bodies. Oh, wow, really slow down. And if it loads, you can click around on the map and get a pop-up that will show you the name of the water body, and it highlights that water body, right? So you can see where they all are. You can also skip around to just see where is Puget Sound? What's the outline, the official definition of Puget Sound, or the greatly contested in our hallway northern boundary of the Salish Sea up here. Zoom around and see these different definitions. Okay, second chapter, freshwater in the Salish Sea bioregion. So this is a hydrography data set looking at the rivers and lakes and watersheds of the Salish Sea bioregion. And in here, see the context map. I'm going to show you that if you're curious about the different watersheds, I showed you that busy map, but you can explore the watersheds within the Salish Sea bioregion and also the Upper Fraser River watersheds, which do have water that feeds into the Salish Sea, though it's not included in the bioregion since it is a different climatic and ecological region. But again, you can go around and click on the map and access the area and names of features. And then what I really wanted to show you here, well, I'll say there's a complete streams and lakes data set here. If you want to see all the streams and rivers that we're aware of in the region, zoom in, and more will load. But I want to show you the major rivers. If you want to think about what are the big freshwater contributions to the Salish Sea, notice on my graph here, I've split out the Fraser River on the right from all the other rivers because it's such a big contributor. And you can navigate around and click on the rivers on the map to access monthly stream discharge, the amount of water moving through it, records for each of the big rivers. And there's table data as well. And I won't go into it in any detail right now, but we also have visualizations of the seasonal changes in discharge, where you can see some river systems that are fed by meltwater from glaciers have their peak flow late in the summer, and others that are fed primarily by rainwater have their peak flow, their highest flow in the winter. Okay, so that's freshwater. Then we have a climate chapter where you can explore basic current climate. So this looks at 1991 to 2010 average climate conditions. And I'm going to look at prevailing wind. Kind of interesting. You can see how it changes in between January and July for our region as a whole. And I'll just go down to precipitation. Because precipitation is such a strikingly spatially variable phenomenon in our region, if it loads, where we have such high rainfall in the mountains. I'll click on one of these, and you can see it in inches as well as millimeters. So up here, where we're thinking over 138 inches of rain in the high mountains, compared with these low-lying areas in the on the Olympic Peninsula, where they're in a rain shadow, and we might get, less than 20 inches potentially. These climate maps let you click on little plus signs here that show you records for individual climate stations averaged over this time period. So if you'd like to see how precipitation varies month to month for individual specific climate stations, you can look at that. Each of these chapters I'll mention ends with a data and sources section where you can access the individual data sets, make a web map of it, or download it for GIS analysis yourself. Okay, 3 chapters about people stuff now. Land ownership. Let's see, jurisdictions, if you just want to know who's in charge of the land. And then this land ownership data set that I spent an absurd amount of time trying to create because it's really hard to get these records. This shows us that less than 30% of the land overall in the Salish Sea bioregion is privately owned. It's mostly government owned. 17% by federal government agencies and 50% by state or provincial government agencies. And I think that's kind of interesting when you're thinking about who's managing the land. Also, you see these striking patterns like this diagonal line on Vancouver Island. That's not a cartographic error. That represents historical legacy of this strange land grant program done in the 1800s, trying to get someone to build a railroad on Vancouver Island. But of course, that has really big implications for land management, what's happening with ecosystems today. And seeing it on a map makes it more real, makes it more apparent how we see these arbitrary ownership patterns. In this chapter, I also want to show the protected areas data set. I complained about how that was hard to harmonize across the bioregion, but now we have, I think, an improved, if not perfect, protected areas database for the Salish Sea bioregion. We can see parks and protected lands and waters cover 30% of the Salish Sea bioregion. 34% of the land has some level of protected or park status, though, of course, some of that is Forest Service land, which has very different protection levels than, say, our national or state parks. But in this chapter, you can explore the different parks, click around and access some details, their names. For the state and national parks, at least I have the date established, area, and so on. A couple more, land cover, land use. I'll just show you the land cover map based on satellite imagery. This is basically the map I showed before of land cover in my presentation. We'll go around and explore the different land cover categories, shrubland and coniferous forest and so on. And then I will just end with the human populations chapter. This shows that view at nighttime, right? Looking down at the urban lights there in Seattle and Vancouver up here. This is a chapter full of census records, demographic data, where you can see, for instance, how the population of the Salish Sea bioregion has changed from the 1990s to the present day and how it's projected to change by the 2030s. And you can click around to access pop-ups with more details for individual counties or regional districts to view how population has changed over time. And one last map in this chapter. Just want to show that even though the population has grown a lot, and even though human effects are pervasive throughout the Salish Sea bioregion, human population is strikingly clustered. These little red blobs on that map contain 50% of the people who live in the Salish Sea bioregion, or did as of 2010. I don't think it's changed too much since then. So pretty concentrated population. So I hope you will explore the Salish Sea Atlas. Go to the website, click around the different chapters. Remember that you can access the data and sources if you want to make your own maps. You just click on any of the data links at the end and slowly it will load and we can make a web map. More chapters will be added, so just keep an eye on the website to see the new stuff coming out. And if you do go and explore the maps, please take some time to click around and zoom, because so much changes when you zoom in and out and interact with it. It's really designed to be a different experience from reading through a static atlas where you would just see what the cartographer intended. Instead, you kind of get to choose what you want to see with this interactive interface. Okay, and I will stop there, and happy to take questions. Wait, do we have our question moderator? No. Okay. So questions from people in the room first. Yeah.
In addition to this, are there other examples of bioregions that you know of that you aren't working in directly, but that need this kind of work?
Yeah. So people try to define bioregions in lots of different areas. The Salish Sea bioregion is a subset of the Cascadia bioregion that you might have heard of, that covers this bigger area going north to Alaska and south to Northern California and east into Idaho. And I've seen bioregions defined for areas in the Midwest and the Southeast as well. So you could think of different scales of bioregions that might be nested within each other, defined often by watersheds, but also with this eye to the ecosystem type. But of course, Cascadia includes a lot of different ecosystem types. So what counts as a consistent ecosystem? It's valuable to look at it at different scales. Yeah, but lots of different areas have pushes for this bioregional recognition. Yeah.
For inspiration for wanting to spend like a good chunk of the rest of your life making this atlas?
That's a very good question. What was my inspiration for deciding to just spend the rest of my life making this atlas? And I have spent a huge amount of time on it. It's kind of absurd. Frustration, passion for good maps, but yeah, frustration. You know, I spent the first few years living here and teaching here, trying to find data sets that my students could use to make these different maps, trying to find data sets to put in my own scholarly work, and being frustrated again and again that it was so hard to find the data that I needed. And I kept thinking, like, it must be there somewhere. I just haven't found it. And finally, I had to admit, no, it does not exist. There is no way to just download an easy impervious surfaces data set for the Salish Sea bioregion. So I decided I had to make it because no one else was going to. But then it's this, you know, it's a geographer's dream, right? To get to kind of travel back into the history of geography where we just described places and made these beautiful maps and told the story of the world. Geography means to write the earth, right? Those are the root words of geography. And so making an atlas is writing the story of the earth. And that's kind of, I think, the biggest honor for a geography geek that you could get. And somehow I snuck in before anybody else did it. So, right. and I keep being frustrated, so I'll keep working on it. Yeah.
There's a couple specific questions online regarding the data sets. One is,
are air quality maps within the Salish Sea Atlas? And also, did you include conservation easement properties in the protected land?
Okay, so I don't have any air pollution data yet. I would like to do some pollutants mapping at some point. That's not part of the atlas yet. I'd like to do some water pollution maps as well. So keep an eye out, but nothing has started yet. And then some conservation easement data is included in the protected areas data set. I would not be at all surprised if those data sets are a little out of date. So I drew my data from multiple different government sources, but if those data sets are not up to date, then my data set won't be. So I bet there's some easements missing, but some of them are included. And you can open up the tables and the pop-ups and sort through by the type of protected status. Yeah.
Have you considered ever making a portion or a certain set of the data set open source so people can add in, their own findings into it?
So they're all open source. They're all licensed as Creative Commons. Oh, sorry. They asked if I've considered making some of the data sets open source so people could contribute data to it. So they're licensed as open source, which means that anybody can take them and modify them. But I'm not accepting contributions directly into the atlas because that's its whole own like full-time job trying to go through and do the quality control. I do really appreciate hearing from people who find an interesting data set. It is fantastic to see volunteer geographic information projects where people contribute data. But then when you want to go through and do the quality control and make sure that all the variables are still harmonized so they're consistent, that just takes a lot of shepherding. So at this point, no, but I could certainly see some more targeted spin-off projects that perhaps you would like to do, using some data from this to make your own web map that accepted volunteered information about a specific variable or topic, right? But somebody needs to steward that data. That's a lot of work. Yeah. Great question though. Yeah.
What was the disagreement about the northern border?
Oh, Stefan just goes farther north because there wasn't like the oceanic definition yet of exactly what the Salish Sea is. So in part, it's just that we're using different definitions. Stefan said all the watersheds that drain at all into the Salish Sea, right? And I said just the ones that drain directly into the legal definition. Yeah, but I showed you those maps. Lots of different boundaries have been drawn. There's kind of surprising inconsistency, but maybe it's not surprising since it's only a decade-old definition and not that widely known yet. Others?
What's next?
What is, well, okay, good, yeah, okay. Yeah,
Oh,
I'll save Stefan's question.
do you have any collaborations or like contacts with somebody who's doing like a similar thing with the transnational like Great Lakes, and you like get like beat off each other like, hey, how are you dealing with this?
You know, I don't really have like a transboundary mapper connection. There's this group of coastal atlas makers who are mostly like working with government agencies that I kind of get some good ideas from, but no one specifically who's working with transboundary regions, which seems like a missed opportunity. So thank you. I should probably have someone to complain to who understands these challenges. Yeah. More from online.
Someone's asking, are you looking at fisheries activity? What is happening with the salmon returns? And have your efforts been directed?
Okay, am I looking at fisheries data? Not currently, that's not one of the chapters I've done. But that is something that obviously needs to be mapped. But it is another thing that's challenging. Add to the list of complaints that salmon run data are housed by so many different agencies and recorded differently. I've kind of tried to start with that, but I haven't made a lot of progress yet. But that is perhaps one of the data sets that inspired this project in a way, because every year in my GIS classes, one of my students wants to make maps about salmon. And it's so hard to get the data to work across the border. So I will have to do that just like for my own vendetta about the challenges of that, but also because it's really important. But not yet. The animals type chapters, I think, are going to come kind of later. I saw somebody asked about the top challenge with making this in the early questions before the talk online. And the top challenge is being familiar with all of these different data sets and familiar enough with the systems and concepts to make good decisions about which data are valid and how to harmonize them. And that's a wonderful thing because I get bored really easily. I like learning new things all the time. Trying to learn everything about a bioregion is a lot. So I'm kind of putting off the fishery stuff I don't know as much about till later, I think. But I will get there eventually since I've just committed my whole life in front of all of you to this. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking that. Yes. Okay. So oceanography is next. I'm working on it, trying to map ocean circulation. I've got the bathymetry mapped out on the depths, but ocean circulation is complicated. And there are these wonderful oceanographic models that simulate how water is moving through, but it's so complicated with wind, with tidal currents, and with the deep water flow. So the challenge with that one is not really the data exactly, but trying to translate into something that makes sense, that isn't overly complicated, so I can communicate a pattern. So this summer, I hope to work on that. Also the vegetation chapter, terrestrial vegetation, I'm like a third of the way done with or something. So maybe that will come out this summer too. And after that, my plan is transportation and the geology and geomorphology chapters will come out at some point after that. But yeah, oceanography is obviously really important, but it's a complicated system. I did not choose an easy place to make oceanographic maps of. So it's going to take me a little while to work through the geovisualization cartography challenges of that. Yeah. Sorry about the what? The kelp mapping, yes. So about the kelp mapping, I have a graduate student who's fantastic, and she's working on just mapping out what we know about kelp, because we're finding there are a lot of areas where we don't have survey data. There's some really good researchers in Canada working on remotely sensed records, using satellite imagery and photos taken from the air, but those data aren't done yet. So this graduate student is just trying to compile everything we know and map it out. And if we end up with something comprehensive enough, it will go in the atlas, but it's kind of its own worthy, definitely its own worthy project all on its own to the side. But hopefully we'll get to some marine vegetation chapters eventually. Yeah.
There's a question online asking, do you work with local land trusts who have a wealth of mapping information?
Well, sometimes, I mean, I'm working across such a big area that I can't really rely too heavily on any one local organization. So asking about whether I'm working with land trusts. There are some land trusts who have fabulous websites with lots of GIS data, and I draw on some of that. A lot of that is pretty local scale though. And I'm trying to focus on the big scale variables, but I'm not too picky, like any reliable data source, I'm drawing on. And I'm hoping that as word of this gets out, because this is just pretty recently published stuff, most of these chapters are over the last year, that I'll end up with some new connections and new networking sort of opportunities with organizations that might have data that's not publicly released online. And land trusts are a really good one for that.
There's a question online about the northern border again.
Mhm.
How do you, the interface of water, of fish coming through, I mean, to some extent that happens out of Juan de Fuca also, but through Johnstone Strait, culture and fish.
Culture and
outside of
fish.
your drawn boundary.
Do I pay any attention to them? Not
Yeah.
really. Let me bring up this map. Oh, wait, no, actually. Sorry, Dizzy. Okay, I just want to remind you again, oceanographic modeling suggests here that at 95% about of the water moving in and out of the Salish Sea, connecting with the open ocean, goes through the Strait of Juan de Fuca, not through that northern boundary, through Discovery Passage and so on. And so I didn't write the legal definitions, but the people who did, when you read through the details, the Canadian definition in particular, since the northern borders in Canada, they paid more attention to it, is based on oceanographers' knowledge of how much water is transiting through these passageways. So not a lot is passing through that northern boundary. And that means that poor Johnstone Strait, which I have nothing against, and it's a perfectly interesting area up there along the northern side of Vancouver Island, that is not part of the bioregion, since it is not part of the legal definition of the Salish Sea, and in fact exchanges very little water through the Salish, with the Salish Sea. That is counterintuitive for us. We are terrestrial organisms. We look at a 2D map, we see, well, look, there's water that connects around the northern edge of Vancouver Island. Obviously, it's all connected. It's the same waterway. But if you look under the surface at the bathymetry, there are these areas of sills at this higher elevation, basically under the water, that restrict flow through those passageways, which you don't know from the surface. But that's why that area is excluded from this definition. Any more questions about the northern border?
You last questions out there?
Jenny?
The western boundary on the state of Montezuma
Mhm.
looks like a little bit arbitrary. How does that figure out?
Well, so, okay, again, skipping around a little bit. There's two different versions here. That's a good, like, super detail-oriented question. If you look on these maps, there's sort of the little blue thick line that's the Strait of Juan de Fuca's boundary. And that has its own legal definition. Again, US and Canadian geographic name boards adopt legal definitions, and they just describe it as being in between these 2 points, one on the Olympic Peninsula and one on Vancouver Island. My bioregional boundary extends a little past that because I defined the bioregion as the watersheds that feed into the Salish Sea. And those watersheds, you can see in purple, this Crescent Hoko watershed there on the west has this boundary to the left. Now, that does look a little arbitrary to me in the ocean, but that is the definition that's used by the hydrography mapping people in the US and Canada. And I wanted to make it easy to just compare watersheds basically and follow their boundaries. And anything you do, you like snip off these little pieces of land. I have obsessed about this far more than is healthy, I assure you, but trying to keep it as simple and reducing the arbitrary decisions that I make as much as I can has been sort of a goal. But yeah, how do you do the boundary when it's connected to the open ocean is a little tricky. I feel like the northern boundary makes a lot more sense to me because that pink line is following the bathymetry, the depths themselves. But then my bioregional boundary goes a little past that because there are streams on the islands that feed into that. I know. There is no reality. That's the conclusion of my talk, okay? Yes, we can talk about these definitions forever, I think, but mostly joyfully.
Last quick question up there.
Oh, I was just gonna ask if you could, like, if you had thought about putting a gallery section on the website with all of the maps side by side.
Oh, well, that would be a lot. I mean, you might lose some of the interactiveness if you were just clicking through, but it's not a bad idea. I would like to put in a gallery eventually of the more static maps that came out of the Salish Sea report. Those are available on the CEDAR website through our Westerns library. Let me put up my thank you slide, which also has links to these things. My little thank you slide here. So you can go to that first link to access the Salish Sea Atlas itself. That has the reference maps, data downloads, and the interactive chapters. And then static maps that came from the same data sets for the State of the Salish Sea report can be found on CEDAR there. Also, if you just Google State of the Salish Sea report, you will find it, I promise you. And then I'll just say thank you to my funders here and my undergraduate research assistants who helped at the very beginning of this project and made me focus on it and actually get things done. And then of course to Bert Weber and Stefan Freeland and the team of people who worked on the Salish Sea report, including Jenny here, who asked me all the really good questions like where the northern border is, a lot of times until I actually made decisions about all these things. So please, please, please go check out all these maps and make sure you've seen the Salish Sea report as well.
Okay.
Good, we've got a time?
Thank you.
Yes, okay,
you.
thank you everyone. Thank you for having questions.